Peter, in first place, let me tell you that I thank you very, very much for having been my headmaster. I learned a lot from you, and it changed my life, really. And that letter of introduction that you wrote me, so to whom it might concern, ended up being very valuable because I entered the Catholic University of São Paulo, of Rio, with that. It turns out that the head of that Department of Economics was also an Oxonian.
Oh, really? Incredible, incredible.
Incredible. And well, I was thrilled to be accepted. And then he told me, well, I could hardly do otherwise with a letter like you showed.
Oh, well, that's interesting to know. I mean, these are things that I learn, and it's fascinating. But I have very fond memories of you, and what an excellent school captain you were. I can remember that very, very, very clearly. And I'm really fascinated by what you're doing. I'm fascinated by the fact that you're publishing this book. And I'm delighted that my good friend Roger James, who has been a friend of mine since we were at school, who incidentally is a Cambridge man, and that's Roger James. And he lost his wife, as I lost mine, a few years ago. And he now has a new lady friend called Jean, who is a lecturer in anthropology at London, who was, I think, a lecturer in anthropology at London University. I thought that Roger and Jean would be my very best representatives, better than my own children, who are not perhaps so intellectual. I mean, if we look at the four of them who live in London, the first one is a pilot. He's an airline captain.
Yes.
The next one's worked in Reuters for 30 years. Then the next one is he's in partnership with my other son who's in Mexico, and they run a logistics software business. And then my daughter is in the process of becoming a teacher. The only one of my children who has followed in my footsteps. And she's planning to teach languages, and she's planning to train starting this year. And yesterday she gave me the excellent news that she had been accepted at her first choice.
Congratulations! I'm so happy for her.
So that's the youngest, Veronica.
Great, Veronica.
All these, of course,
fantastic.
The children with Susie all arrived after you left the school, obviously.
Yes. Your first child, if I remember correctly, was called Rupert, right? Wasn't he?
That's right, Rupert, yes.
That's right, yes. So that's
why he works with David. Yeah.
Yes.
He works with David, and as I say, he works at a distance most of the time because he lives in Purley, South London, where Veronica lives, and he goes to Mexico every so often. And he was just telling me yesterday on the phone he'd been to Mexico just recently and did the asado for the for David's office staff, at least to celebrate the end of year. So there we are. So they're all sort of doing their different things.
Sweet. Peter, let me tell you
Tell me a bit more about yourself, Fred.
About myself.
I'm very fascinated. Yeah, I'm fascinated with what you're doing. Apart from going to the Catholic University of Rio, which I remember having gone to see if they would accept the IB, which I think they did eventually.
Well, I'll just tell you something.
Quite a lot.
Well, I'll tell you, I left school in 1968. It was a difficult time in Uruguay. We had the Tupamaros in action.
That's right.
The government was losing its democratic credibility, and it wasn't easy to be a student there at the time. I entered the university in Uruguay and was elected the representative of the first year of the university, the first year cohort. And we were about 900 students. So I was in the middle of all that struggle. Being trained at the British School, I was very much in favor of freedom of expression, but something that neither the government nor the left in Uruguay wanted to hear very much about. So it wasn't easy to control the media.
Yeah.
I could see that it was getting worse and worse, and it was time to leave. And I left for Brazil. I never thought I would leave for so long. So I chose a neighboring country that was relatively stable, unlike Argentina at the time. One could see that Perón was just hanging in there. And it was the only place where I could leave and be still close to Uruguay.
Sure.
But as you know, when one leaves one's native country, it's pretty hard to come back. And I never realized that until, it was too late. In Rio, I joined in Rio, I joined the Catholic University. I left with an award there as a top student of my cohort, which enabled me to get...
Excellent.
Yes, it was very nice. Yes, I studied hard. It was the only thing that I really could do at the time. I then joined the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, which was a leading master's degree in Rio de Janeiro at the time. And that enabled me to enter Cambridge University. There is a bit of...
So you went to the other place.
Yes,
there's a friendly rival between Oxford and Cambridge. The friendliest way of putting it is we went to Oxbridge.
You're right. I remember being admitted, and I didn't really feel that was my place. I was pleased enough to have been admitted, but I wasn't sure I was going to be able to leave with the.
But obviously you did.
I did, yes. Yes, 4 years later, 3.5 years later, I got my PhD degree. And of course, that makes a hell of a difference. So I was invited to lecture at Princeton University, and I spent 3 years there. I had married an anthropologist myself. She enrolled in graduate studies at Princeton. And after that, she wanted to go back to Panama, and I couldn't keep her away from her country for longer. We already had 2 small children. We needed some family support. And she chose to go to Panama, to her family. And I got an award from the World Bank, the McNamara Fellowship, which enabled me to spend a sabbatical away. So I went to Panama. It was a hell of an experience. I had never been in a fully trading country, which makes a complete difference.
No, I've been to Panama many times.
Yes, the attitude of the people along the axis of the canal, Colón, Panama City.
Right, yeah.
The predominant ethos is that of merchants, traders. And
very much so.
They are eminent negotiators, but they lack the type of stamina that we find in the rest of Hispanic America, where people are far more contentious, not necessarily for the better. No. But the temperament is completely different. After some 4 years in Panama, where I lectured in an American university there, I joined the World Bank, and that led me throughout the world. Stints, of course. I always lived in Washington, but I would spend extended periods in South Africa, Russia, Ukraine, you name it. Very different countries.
Very, very interesting.
Yes, and you know what that did, besides the British School, where we had so many international students, was gave me the keen idea of what is necessary to communicate effectively and very quickly amongst different cultures. I needed my projects to work, and I needed to decode how far I could trust each one of my partners to do what was expected of them. And that had to be done very quickly.
Obviously, yeah.
I didn't succeed always, but I loved what I did. And it placed me in the center of action in countries in transformation, like South Africa with Mandela, or Russia immediately after Boris Yeltsin and others. So, it was a hell of a...
I should tell you that I met Mandela.
Yes.
I used to work for United World Colleges as a Latin American representative, and we had a conference in Johannesburg, and it was chaired. Well, the main guest was Mandela,
of course, and
then we had after the formal sessions, we had a kind of evening cocktail where we were all presented to him, and I must say I found him quite fascinating.
Yes,
he's one of the great leaders of this time.
He was exquisite.
A lovely person.
They were very lucky to have him. as a leader at that time,
Sure.
particularly, you know.
He was just the right person to do
Yes,
that.
yes, no, fascinating. Very, very accommodating, very attuned with the different cultures of his country, which many people don't realize in South Africa.
Of which
It's almost a
there are
federation.
many, yes. Yes, there are many in South Africa.
So
Yeah,
that was fun.
of course, before I came to the British school, I lived in Africa.
Yes, you lived in Rhodesia then, didn't you?
What used to be called Rhodesia, yeah.
What before Rhodesia?
It used to be called Southern Rhodesia.
Southern Rhodesia,
Yeah. And of course, it's now Zimbabwe and has been since 1980.
Yes. And immediately after that, you joined the British School in Montevideo?
That's right. That's right.
So you came straight out of Africa.
Yeah, no, it was very interesting because a music teacher from one of the prep schools near us in Peterhouse, was the name of the school, in a place which is now called Marandela. It's 50 miles to the east of Harare, and but this guy got a job at St. George's in St. George's College in
Yes, in Buenos Aires.
So I wrote to the head. And I said, look, I'm interested in coming to Latin America because we had a next door neighbor who had worked very happily and very successfully on the railways in Buenos Aires. And he infused us greatly about Latin America generally. And so this is how, but when I got a reply from this man, said, look, I'm very sorry, I don't have an opening for you, but I've passed your papers to my friend, Mr. Lodge.
Yes, which was your immediate predecessor.
Exactly. And he, I was appointed deputy head before he left, and so when I left Africa, I knew where I was coming. So that was quite interesting. Although I knew no Spanish at the time.
Yes. And you were very young, weren't you? You were about 30 years old at the time, weren't you?
I was. The day I arrived, I was 29, more or less.
29.
Really? I was head at 29. Yeah,
fantastic.
Very young, too young actually. I learned a lot.
It didn't show that you were too young.
Perhaps with the hindsight of experience, you can see my point.
And tell me, you stayed, that was 1960?
64.
1964.
That's right.
And you stayed in Montevideo with the British School until when?
I left in 78.
78. That makes almost 14 years.
14 years, yeah. Yes, absolutely.
So you left your imprint there for sure. I remember, I recall you as my headmaster, particularly when I was on my second year liceo. I was some sort of a gang leader and very disruptive.
Oh yes, I remember that. I remember you had quite a bad reputation.
Yes, unfortunately.
One of the great things about you was that you changed completely.
But that's precisely something that I tell my colleagues, and I can't tell how or why, and not precisely when either.
No, I think it was sometime in third year.
That's right. Yes, I think so.
That you suddenly changed, and you came up because I mean, at the beginning of third year, I don't think anybody would have thought of you as being a candidate to be head boy. But by the time we got to the end of third year, it was unanimous, as far as I remember, among the staff. And
the change, yes.
The dramatic change. I mean, it wasn't just a small change; it was a big change. And look where it's taken you. You've gone wonderful, very, very fascinating career, and which I imagine you're still busy, as I'm still busy one way or another.
Yes, for sure. Well, I think that in some ways you shaped me, Peter. I remember you suspended me on the last weeks of my second year of liceo, and
I remember that. You were impossible. You were impossible at that point.
Well, I apologize for having given you a hard time, but I guess it was as part of my development.
It's a stage in your development, and well, I mean, I've always thought of myself as a bit of a rebel in many ways against traditional values, and I mean, not wanting to live in my own country, for example. I wanted to live overseas. Well, when I left Oxford, I went straight to Africa.
Well, isn't that fascinating? Yes, because those are signs of rebellion. And one which I think that brings us back to the British School was the way that you realized that it was time to instill a more international-oriented education at the British School of Montevideo. And
Sure.
which, you were only 29 years old, going on to 30, and you really changed the style of education by joining the International Baccalaureate.
Well, actually, we were one of the founder schools.
Yes.
The school had the number of the school was number 11, which
11.
suggests of the 4,000 or 5,000 schools that are in the world now, and we were number 11. We were the first school in Latin America and the first school in the Southern Hemisphere. And it all had to, okay, I was tremendously enthusiastic about doing something which was definitely international. I felt that it was the right thing to do. I was unhappy with the British A-level system being applied to Spanish speakers when they found it very difficult to do English A-level, which was intended for English speakers, and Spanish A-level, which was intended also for non-Spanish speakers. It was a senseless arrangement. And what it did do, it changed it produced a great uplift in academic standards in the top 2 years, because we had to do it in parallel with the Liceo, because it was the only way as you remember, Liceo ended in 4th year. That was it. So, and what we did, because in those days, the IB only had exams in May. So the students who did the exams stayed on for they came for 3 or 4 months, and to take the exams in May, in the year after they finished. Now, of course, when the British school brought in 5th year and 6th year, it was obvious to move it forward to do it at the end of, in the beginning of 6th year.
Yes.
And it was even more obvious. The thing is, in those days, there was only one annual session of the IB exams. But very much, I pushed very strongly when they appointed me to be the regional director for Latin America, which is what I spent 18 years doing. Long after I left school, the first thing I pushed for were exams in Spanish and exams in November, and we got them both through very quickly. And but the British school only changed to November in relatively recent years, since the turn of the century. Can you believe it? I mean, it was such an obvious thing to do.
Of course.
But they didn't want to do it. They wanted to hang on to the May session, and then they had these students for the rest of the 6 years doing just national programs. But the IB is very well recognized in Uruguay. It's probably one of the best recognitions in the whole of Latin America, in the sense that the students only had the IB diploma. There was the last recognition was in 2008 or 2009, and the students only had to do a couple of subjects apart from the IB to get the national diploma. And that is tremendous. It's quite different in Argentina. In Argentina, the students have to do the IB and the national system, and there's very little in common. So that's very tough, very, very tough indeed.
So it has a rough going in Argentina.
Yeah, but we've got a lot of schools which are very successful. The top schools like St. George's, St. Andrews, Northlands, these schools have done extremely well.
It's actually interesting. Let me make a small detour there, because you probably heard a lot of Sarmiento, Domingo Faustino.
Oh, yes, very much so.
A great educator. And, I mean, the man was difficult, sometimes called mad, but the guy really did a lot for education in Argentina.
He did a great deal.
Yes, after what he did, incentivizing public education, libraries and the rest, 100 years later, Argentina can brag about 3 Nobel laureates in sciences, 2 in peace, which is something that, no other Latin American country has achieved. And yet it's sad to realize that they closed up, in a sense that the closing up of the minds And rather than internationalize education, they remained in the resisting, which is strange how people close up again, despite such a superb initial input to international.
To be fair, Argentina, Buenos Aires is probably still the city with more IB schools than any other in the world. There are about 35 schools in Greater Buenos Aires. Yeah.
But they still have to do it on a pari passo alternative with the official system of education.
Well, what they do, they find unofficial ways of making combinations, if you see what I mean.
Okay, good.
They teach they teach the two things in together.
Right. I see.
Notice here to say that your internet connection is unstable now; it's gone again. So I hope you're hearing me okay.
I'm hearing you very well. Yes.
Perfect. I'm hearing you very well. Now, this is as successful as yesterday was unsuccessful.
No, yesterday was a disaster.
Absolutely, yeah.
But tell me something, Peter, because I think it's fascinating from the point of view of leadership, that you, at 29 years of age, you were able to see what the future would look like and change a rather stolid system of education, inadequate for the setting, say the mismatch between the languages and the culture of the people, and realize that it was necessary to do something more international, some 20 years before globalization became a keyword.
Yeah, that's true. Because I felt that, I might have even got enthusiastic about the IB for the wrong reasons. I was interested in finding a way of raising the standards in the Liceo, and I was interested in a broader approach, and the IB seemed to provide the answer. And once I started to get in contact with the IB, I realized it was a better answer than I thought. But to be fair, the IB wasn't even heard of when I first went to the British school. But we had, you probably remember, there was a girl called Albertal in the school.
Sorry, what was her name?
A girl called Albertal. I don't remember her Christian name.
No.
But her father was a UNESCO man. He was in charge of the UNESCO office in Montevideo. He said he was the one that provided the first information about the IB, which I received. And because the IB went through a period of gestation, if you like, over a period from about 1964, 65 to 1968, the official date of starting the IB as a system. And it started off as an experiment in international education. And curiously enough, the first Director General of the IB was the person who was in charge of the University Department of Education in Oxford, under whom I trained and whose lectures I found very fascinating. And if there's one person who I would look back to, this man his name was Alec Peterson, and he was a very distinguished educator, and he had a lot of very interesting ideas. And I would say he was the one who influenced me most. And I'm not the only one of the IB originals that has recognized the influence of Alec on our thinking. A number of other people have said, when I went about 10 years ago, I went to a conference in Montreal, and I was asked to, I was part of a panel of IB originals, if you like, and one of the questions we all had to answer was, what was it that brought you into the IB? And we all said the same, Alec Peterson. It was very interesting. And it was Alec Peterson. I mean, how did we really get involved apart from tuning our interest? A man who led of the International School of, the United Nations International School of New York, whom I met before, whose name I can't remember at the moment. So he sent me, because he'd been to Montevideo, had looked at our school previously, this man, and he wrote me a note. He said, by the way, Alec Peterson is going to Santiago de Chile. Why don't you write and ask him to drop off in Montevideo? Which is exactly what we did. And Alec Peterson came to the school. This was in January '69. The board were in favor. The staff were fantastic. We had a very, very keen staff who were very interested to to see this project develop. I mean, without a supportive staff, you can't do it. It's not something you can do on your own.
It's a fascinating story. It's a fascinating story, really, Peter, because it shows the importance of networks. In the sense, you trained with Alec Peterson, he trained other people, he went over to the IB, and now we have a fantastic network of IB education centers all over the world. How many schools carry the IB?
I think it's about 5,000.
5,000.
And the IB says that they're educating about 1 million students.
1 million students?
Because the IB doesn't have just the diploma program, which is the one that was the first one, which existed on its own for about 20 years. But there is a middle years program for students aged 11 to 16. There is a primary years program for students from kindergarten to 11. And they've more recently introduced something which Alec Peterson tried to get me involved with in the early 80s, which was what is now called the IB.
Your image now froze. But you're back. Yes.
Oh, no. I think I probably haven't moved. That's the issue, I'm afraid. And so from an initial perspective of yours, of attempting to raise the educational standards of the school, that is what called you to look for an alternative. And in looking, you came across the IB through the UNESCO representative in Montevideo. Exactly.
And you found out that, the person who had idealized this or who was running it was actually your former teacher at Oxford.
Well, he was the head of the Oxford University Department of Education.
Isn't
he gave fascinating lectures, and he was a rebel. He didn't like the British system of education.
Yes.
I didn't like the British system of education either, because I was forced to do, because the British A-level system, as you probably know, is very limited. It goes into great depth, but it's very limited. I mean, I studied 3 languages at A-level.
Yes.
No maths, no social science, no natural science, no arts, nothing, just languages.
Yes. Which is something that I remember was lacking in the education I received at the school. A stronger emphasis in humanities and arts. Yes, you're right.
Well, the IB corrected all that.
Good.
Because the IB the IB obliges you to do your first language, Spanish in most cases, English, and you can now do 2 first languages in the IB without any difficulty. And I think the school takes that option, an option which didn't exist at the beginning. And then you have to do a social science, a natural science, mathematics, and a 6th subject, which can either be an arts subject or another subject from one of the other groups 2, 3, or 4. The British school has a very wide range of options in the IB, which is, and this is interesting. All the more successful IB schools in the River Plate area, and I can say this with some authority as I'm now director of the IB Association of the River Plate. We have schools on both sides of the River Plate, mainly, of course, in Buenos Aires. But the leading schools are precisely the ones that have a greatest range of options. It's very interesting. And one of the things which really put the British school on the map, IB-wise, was in our first year, we chose 20 students from what was the graduation year of 1970. And we taught them, first of all, they did you can do 2 subjects of the 6 IB subjects in your first year. We took that option because we had to do the preparation in the afternoon. In the morning, we had the Liceo. Then when that worked very well, we decided, well, let's put these 20 people in for the IB diploma. Not only did we get 16 out of the 20 through, but one of the students got the second highest mark in the world that year. Of course, there were only about 80 candidates in the whole world.
But still a world champion.
Yeah, but you may remember this girl. Her name was Valerie D.
Yes, yes, of course.
And she,
yes,
well, she got 40 out of the then 42-point maximum, which was, and then people looked, well, where is this? Where is this Uruguay? And somebody in Geneva once told me, I think it could be Paraguay. Are you talking about Paraguay? I said, no, this is Uruguay, which is on the River Plate.
So and, really, she put us on the map.
Very much so, very much so. And what's more, she was the first student to win a scholarship, a university prize in the UK. The first IB graduate. She went to the University of Bristol and read sciences. She was excellent in science.
Fascinating, fascinating.
So that was the first. You know, we realised we kind of arrived.
Yes, when yes, you were doing the right thing.
When that happened, I was absolutely convinced we were doing the right thing. In fact, so much so that when I left the school, I had to make a decision. Was I going to continue to be a headmaster somewhere, or should I take a senior position at school and try and work in developing the IB? That was my decision. I decided to take a senior position in a school, and I got an offer from St. George's College in Quilmes, Buenos Aires, which is one of the top schools there. I suspect you probably went to play rugby or something there.
Yes, we always lost against them, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, they were pretty good. I mean, they were the home of, as the British School was the home of rugby in Uruguay. St. George's was the home of rugby, where rugby started in Argentina.
I see. Well,
and then after I worked there for years, the 4 children I had with Susie are all graduates from St. George's. They all did the IB. They all did very well. David got over 40 points, which is sort of a sign of real excellence. And then I went to St. Andrews. I was called. I wanted to do a little bit less time-wise, and St. Andrews offered me a part-time job. One of which of the responsibilities was to introduce the IB. So I introduced the IB at both the St. George's, because St. George's created a new school called St. George's North in around 1990. And I was responsible for introducing the IB there, and also at St. Andrews. And then when I left St. Andrews, I was in a semi-retired position. I worked for a group of schools called the International School, and one of those I introduced the IB, because the 3 schools, the third one, the IB hadn't yet functioned. But I should tell you one thing, which I think you and the British school students should know, the ex-students, is that there is a genuine international school started up this year in Punta del Este, called International College Punta del Este. I'm a member of their board, and I think it's a very fascinating development, because if you look really hard at all the schools doing the IB, the ones that are bilingual, most of them are fixed in a way. They have elements of the tradition from the country where they originated. That's in the case of British school. You've got rugby, you've got prefects, and a number of other aspects of the British tradition. Now, this school is genuinely international in the sense that only half the students are Uruguayan. The other half come from about 20 nationalities, with a big number of Brazilians and a big number of Argentines. And they opened in March this year with 300 students. In a place like Punta del Este, that's amazing.
That's massive.
And it's got very good installations, and I think they're expecting about 100 new students in the second year. When I was the last meeting I went to at the beginning of November, they had 68 students they'd already paid, new students who'd already paid up the entrance fee, and they had a lot more still on the string, as it were. So
and where do they live, Peter?
Well, at the moment, the school has plans to have a boarding section. That hasn't yet really materialized. I think the students from other countries are either living in the, the Argentines, lots of Argentines have places in Punta del Este, flats. They live in the family flat, or they are living in some sort of rented facility.
Right.
But it's a very interesting project. It's on 5 hectares of land at the northern end of Punta del Este, where it more or less molds into Maldonado. That is where the school is located. And it's got very good buildings. It's got a beautiful library, which is open to the local community. It's got the head of games was the Olympic trainer for Uruguay. So they've got some pretty
top-notch people.
And the head of the school is the former head of the secondary school at the British School, a lady called Yara Lindemann. And she was head of the secondary school, the senior school of the British School, until 2 years ago, when she transferred to this school.
To this new school, International School of Punta del Este. And tell me, Peter, with your long experience in education, what do you think is still necessary?
I think it's very important. I think one of the things which I think is greatly lacking in education, and perhaps particularly in state education, is the education has a lot to do with human development. That is the most important thing. And I feel there is a lack in many schools on both sides of the River Plate in this respect. I mean, I've heard some rather awful stories of both schools in Montevideo and in Buenos Aires. But one thing which I should tell you, is the state school IB project in Buenos Aires with 10 schools in the city of Buenos Aires, which have already done 2 years, and they've just taken their second set of exams. And there's another school in Vicente Lopez, which is a distinguished school on the north side of Buenos Aires, and another one which has been in the program as long as St. George's. And so there are 12 schools, 12 state schools in Buenos Aires working on the International Diploma program. And I think that's very interesting, because what you're doing, you're opening up an opportunity which, if it's just in private schools, is very limited. And one of my disappointments when I left the IB in 2000, when I retired, only 5% of the schools in Latin America were state schools. 95% were
private schools.
That has changed enormously. Apart from the 12 schools in Buenos Aires, there's a project in Peru with a group of schools called the Colegios de Alto Rendimiento. There are 25 of those all over the country. There's an even bigger project.
Sorry, in which country?
In Peru.
In Peru,
And in Ecuador, there's an even bigger project, which has, I think, something like 200 schools involved with the IB program. And finally, there's a project in Costa Rica with about 20 schools. So, the balance has changed considerably, although there are some countries.
That's right. And what is it that you would call, what is it that you would call human development, Peter? Just to spell it out.
Well, emotional development, particularly, thinking, development, thinking, attitudes to cultures, particularly, other cultures, which of course is very much part of what the IB is all about. It has a strong philosophy of internationalism, where students are taught to respect and celebrate cultural differences, and that is
Thank you for taking care of this beautiful man.
She doesn't speak Spanish.
No, bueno, gracias, Pepita.
Sí, Pepita says she's got to know you by.
Sí, es cierto, y quiero escucharte cantar tango.
No, she enjoys singing tango, and
yes.
We she goes every week to a. That's
if you had to send a last message to the alumni of the British School now in this interview, what is it that you would like to leave behind, that they keep in mind? Because most of these alumni are either parents or grandparents of children, and they feel intimately the need of guidance in education.
No, I think the two things I would say. One is the importance of international education. I'm very convinced about that. And the other is what we were just talking about, human development. Those are the two things I would regard as the most important. Of course, the International Baccalaureate also, in its very nature, is of a high academic standard. And that's what pulled up the standards in the British School all those years ago. And I'm proud to say the British School has one of the strongest IB programs in the River Plate. One of the things we do in the association each year, one of the things that we do is we award prizes to all students who get 40 points. The 45, which are available.
It's a great encouragement.
The British School last year had 4. No other school in the River Plate got more than 2.
Good. That's something that the British School should brag about.
Every reason to. The British School is a very fine school. And one of the things that has happened to me in the last year or so is I've had a kind of reconnection with students, particularly those who graduated in the 1970s. This all happened because Pepita and we went on a cruise in Patagonia in January 15. Hold it, let me get it right. We're now 17. It was January 16, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And this cruise, one of the things, this took us to the Falkland Islands.
Yes.
And that was very interesting. I was particularly interested because we had a lot of students from the Falkland Islands.
Yes.
Not so much in your day, but in the 70s, we had a lot of them. I went in, for Peter and we did a tour. And at the end of the tour, I went to their museum. And their museum had a bookshop. And one of the first books I saw was by Graham Bound. Graham Bound was a British School graduate, another rebel like yourself and perhaps myself, who wrote a book called Fortress Falkland, which I immediately bought, needless to say.
Fantastic.
And then I got into contact with him. He lives in London. He's a journalist and a writer. He's written several other books. And his books are all in the British School Library. I think it would be one thing that I would ask you to consider is donating a copy of your book to the British School Library.
I will, for sure. I will.
I think that is something which is very important because there are not many people who have written, as far as I know. But this contact Graham led to he got a whole group of students in July of last year. We had a meeting you probably remember the Rathbone family, Jackie Rathbone.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, we had 18 people came, and most of them were from the UK, not all from London, and there were a couple that came from the States, and we had a wonderful day.
I think yes, my brother Pablo was there with you.
Pablo was one of the ones. Yes, he was indeed.
Brilliant.
He was there.
Yes. We should be doing more of that.
Well, we did have more because when I go every Washington to a meeting of the IB workshop providers. Our association, we are permitted to teach, to run official IB workshops. And we have a meeting once a year in Washington of all the providers in North America and Latin America. And I discovered that a fellow called Hernandez lives in Bethesda, and we had a dinner that same year, and we had another one this year, and this led to getting into contact with the two Adams girls, who you may remember.
Sylvia Adams, I remember. Could it be?
Yes, Sylvia was one of them. The other one was, she was one of the first group of IB students. And there were various other students who came to the London thing. And then in February, you probably remember Ambrosio Bertolotti.
Ambrosio Bertolotti, of course, he
1964.
was the elder brother of Alfio. Alfio was a classmate of mine.
That's right.
Yes.
I got we got together with him and two of his classmates in February of this year, and that was very interesting too.
That is, it's
We had a
fascinating.
lunch.
I will take the duty, the assignment that you have given me of donating a book of mine for the British School Library in Montevideo. And it's something that I hadn't thought about, but it is necessary. I think it is important that we go back to our school and tell us what we've become. And that might be some of use to some of the students there studying now.
Do you ever go to Montevideo?
I did, yes, until my mother passed away in July of last year. But I will make a point of trying to go. Something that perhaps is lacking is a point of contact with our former school and perhaps asking us to speak to the students. I would have done that with
the
great
old boys club. The old boys and old girls club is now on the college campus.
Uh-huh.
You remember, it used to be in downtown.
So that would be the focal point.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Because what used to be the club, the cricket club, the school bought them out in the 90s, and they built a gymnasium, a beautiful gymnasium near there, and then they've also extended the senior school and they've extended the junior school. Last year I was shown around the school, and I must say there were some very impressive changes and some beautiful buildings, which make the buildings of our time look rather modest, I must say.
Well, but this wouldn't have happened with your efforts. So I think it is, when you look back into those buildings and you remember the old faces and you see the new ones, you can only have a great sense of satisfaction. So I'm very happy for you, Peter.
No, I feel, if people ask me, well, I've been connected with 5 schools in my life. The last was a group of schools. Now, I think the fondest memories are those of the British School of Montevideo, without any doubt at all. They
will be very glad to hear when I upload this recording. I have to close it now, otherwise we'll be closed by the system itself.
Okay, well, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to meeting you, because I have a house in Stoyle.
Good. I'll make a point of when I travel to Uruguay, I will certainly let you know, and we will meet. It will be my great pleasure.
It will be a great pleasure for me too.
Thank you.
Anyway, all the very best to you, Alfredo.
Same to you.
To all the students. Hope everybody has a great Christmas and good luck and all success for 2018.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, dear.
Bye-bye.